Ready? Okay. There is, I want to go through, I'm not speaking specifically about one Sa'if. I'm going to go through a few interesting nekudas that are negei at the dinim of Ksamim, the things on negei l'maisa, things we see from the Tzemach Tzedek, from the Alter Rebbe, specifically focusing on things that there are machlekes hapaiskim, different people paskin different ways, and we paskin differently because Alter Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, paskin differently. And point out certain yesodis that are important to understand. By now everybody knows that the shiur of a gris is, a shiur of a kesem that's metame is kegris, whatever the size of the gris is. That's a separate shiur, which was already discussed. That's in Sif Hey. It says when does a woman become tame? When is a kesem kegris ve'oid. That means up to a gris, she's fine. Alter Rebbe right away tells you what's gris ve'oid. Ve'oid mashu. A little bit more than a gris is already makes her aser. But a gris is mutter. Because we are toile in machoilas, in the lice, or whatever it is that are small enough that if you're going to crush a lice, you're going to see blood, and the amount of blood is kegris. So the Alter Rebbe points out there's three important nekudas in that Sifkat and the Sifkat and Tes of the Alter Rebbe. First one is what it is. It's gris v'oid mashu. Right. The second point is, what are we toilet? We're toilet only when the color is red. But if the color is black, then we are not toilet in a gris. In a gris because kinim don't release black blood. Interesting Tzemach Tzedek in the end of Siman Kuf Mem Hey. It's b'derech agav to something else. So Tzemach Tzedek brings out the Tzemach Tzedek is at the end of Kuf Mem Hey. Tzemach Tzedek just when discusses about dam and meraglayim, Tzemach Tzedek over there says that when you know for sure that it comes megufa, or if you don't know for sure it comes megufa, the shiur of gris is not, there's not a gzeras chachamim like a gris, and that's a gzeras hakosov. Now, if you're telling them achoiles, then it's like a gris. But if you're talking about a different scenario where you cannot be toiler in a machoiles, then the measurement will change. As the lashon of Tzemach Tzedek is, over there regarding that topic, when you had ein chiluk ben pochus megris, mikigris, the gris v'oid, kuf mem hey, end of kuf mem hey, last paragraph, second part of the last paragraph. Yeah, you have to go through the tshuva afterwards to understand, but the point I want to bring out, this is the only point I get to this if, is ve'ein af kamini lekin in the mes. V'nilad ein chiluk min pochas mikigris gris v'oid. The chiluk ze loy shayach rak sheyesh lis lois bedam ha'choiles. Yeah, only when you're talking about you have to be toil and dam ha'choiles. Over there, there's a shiur of kigris. Means when the tliya is in the ha'choiles, and the shiur is also kigris. But it's not a klal that whenever you want to make a tliyah, the tliyah is going to have to be in that size. And then the last words is, it says, the way that Tzemach Tzedek understood Alter Rebbe is that this idea of a gris is, when it comes to a kesem, is not straight up exeris hakosov. It's when you have to be toiler in the machoilis, you toiler in the gris. And when you're not toiler in the machoilis, when you're dealing with a separate scenario, you're not going to say that every kesem is automatically a gris. How does the Tzemach Tzedek understand that? Because in the same Alter Rebbe, Sifkat and Tes, Alter Rebbe continues that, first of all, when it comes to black blood, if it's black, you're not toiler up to a gris. When are you toiler up to a gris? When you have paroishim. Paroishim mitzuyim, that they do have black blood. So if it's a little bit black, the Alter Rebbe adds the word ktsas, shachir ktsas, not pitch black. Then you could be toiler up to a gris. It's pointing out that the Piskei Dinim of the Talmud of the Tzemach Tzedek, when he discusses this, when he quotes the Alter Rebbe, he deletes the word ktsas. He says when this paroshim mitzuyim, shachir is fine up to a gris. Now, this idea that the kesem is not straight up exeres hakosem, we could also see in the same Piskei Dinim of the Tzemach Tzedek over there, of the Talmud of the Tzemach Tzedek and Sif Hey. He explains, Kevon sha'adovor motzui harbe sheismachu ma'cholis alav godim, because it's so common that you're going to have these lice that are going to be crushed onto the body. Toilim b'hem, that's when you're toilet. Even if she didn't kill it, we still rely that she probably killed it. So if you're in a situation where it's motzi harbe that you have kinim, and therefore wherever you're going to fold the clothing, step, move your hands, you're going to hit lice and it's going to create blood. So then we're toiling it. And if you have paroshim, you also toiler in black. But if you don't have it, so he doesn't mention anything, but if in a place which is not so common, this whole yesod l'chayra doesn't apply. If you're going to go down this mahalach, if you're going to say that the size of a kesem, of a gris, is dependent on the metzias, and it's not exeres chachamim, like we see Sai from the Tzemach Tzedek over here, the way Tzemach Tzedek understands the Alter Rebbe, and Sai from the Piskei Dinim of the Talmud of the Tzemach Tzedek, you have a problem. Because if you don't have mitzuyim harbe, not kinim and not other things, then you have a problem with being toiler up to a gris. L'maaseh, we are still toiler up to a gris, because we're not going to change the mitzias. They're not going to change the halacha, but if you're going to, there is a machlokes, if you follow, there are certain shittas which hold that you go based that the gris size is exeres chacham. The sidrei tahara.
You don't have black.
Huh?
You don't have black. Well.
We don't have black b'chal. Yeah, we don't see black today. This bug's not common anymore. Interestingly, this idea is also found in the sidrei tahara, Sifkot and Yud, towards the end of it, where he's talking about paroshim that they have black, that you could be toiler up to a gris. He says, harbe. Interestingly, he adds the words v'hakel lefi re'ois einei hamoire. The Rav should be determining the metzias on the spot and decide metzias in this location, metzias in this time, and decide what the halacha should be. It means it's not something which is exera, it's something which is dependent on the reality on the ground at the time when the shaila is being asked to you. So if you have, what would you be able, how would you look at it the other way? Let's say we're not going to cancel the whole kesem size being a gris, but we want to take this idea lekula. If you have a situation where you have an infestation of bugs which are bigger than a kinim, if you have, I don't know how big the bed bugs are because I, Baruch Hashem, never saw one. They are pretty small, but lo yitzur, there will be a certain metzias of something which is bigger, and you have it in your house, and you find spots which are bigger than a gris, and you crush these bugs, and you know that that's the size that it's going to be. So if you're going to go based on that, the same way by paroshim you could be made by black. Huh? Because over there you know that she went b'shuk shel tabachim and probably got splattered on her. Over here we don't know. We know you have it in your house. We know that it's matzui in this person's house, so that's why you could be toilet. But if you're going to say that the size of a kesem is kegris, and that is lekula ula chumra, that's what it is, you're going to be stuck. We will toilet more than a gris. Huh? what? Today Angenumen is a kesem, is a gris, and that's it. Unless you have a specific situation that you know, you have a makkah, you have this, you could be toilet in something specific, then you could be makel, even more than that.
Apartment is overrun with big cockroaches.
You ever smashed a cockroach? You saw blood? No. I smashed them and I didn't see any blood. They don't suck your blood.
Dr. Self says that even if she sees the dog coming out of her,
Oh, we're going to get to it soon, yeah. Mosquitoes don't have that much blood. Not that, that's still not bigger than a gris. It's not bigger than what we today consider a gris. Must have been that the kinnis of a mole were much bigger. Kinnim of a mole were much bigger. Or what they're referring to as machoilas is bigger.
Why would toilet on a gris if we know for sure that there's no kinnim?
I said today, Angenumen, we don't follow that svara that it goes like that. We follow that Chachamim paskin the gris, Chachamim were mekel by Ksamim, and that's it. Now, by Ksamim, don't forget, there's a whole different yesod. We mentioned it in the previous shiur, that it's not only about Leah. Ksamim also has other things. There's a limud, dam v'lo kesem. You don't have a hargosha. Be'etzem, she's not asur. So, we're not going to make a chumrah for no reason. Chacham only made it up to a gris, so we keep it up to a gris.
Saying even regarding gris, and the Gemara, whether it's just gris or there are kinnim or not.
Right, but lahalacha, what do we take it? We took it that it's up to a gris, we're toiling. That's the shiur. That's the shiur the Chacham gave. That's the shiur we stick to with today. Let's move to the next topic. This topic is not so clear in the Alter Rebbe, and there is machlekes how to understand the Alter Rebbe in this. Sa'if Vav in the Shulchan Aruch, actually the Beis Yosef, it's not in the Tur, the Beis Yosef brings it. He brings the machlekes Rambam and Ravid. Machlekes Rishonim, it's not only the Ravid and not only the Rambam, there's a team on one side and there's a team on the other side. And that is when you have a shiur gris on the body. Not on the clothing. Do we follow the shiur of gris for a kesem al gufa, yes or no? So Beis Yosef first brings the Ravid and says there he's machmer. He's made the Ravid, the Rashba is mekel. That the shiur of gris applies both on the body, the same way as it applies on the clothing. But the Beis Yosef continues, but according to the Rambam, if it's in a place where we are chayshish that the blood could have come from the body, then ein loy shiur. We don't use the shiur of a gris for a kesem. And he explains that the Rosh also holds like that in the Shut of the Rambam. Seems like the Darkei Moshe also follows, and also understands like the Rosh and the Rambam. The Bach later on Sa'if Ches, Sa'if Kotten Yud Beis in the Bach, he paskins like the Ravid. He paskins like the Ravid, that even by Gufo you need a gris. Elamai, the Bach is machmir, that when you have on the body a few drops together, so even though by a kesem on the clothing we're not mitzad of the drops, when it comes to a Gufo we are mitzad of the drops. But you still need the size of a gris even megufo. Shulchan Aruch brings both opinions. Starts by bringing the opinion that, in Sif Vav, starts bringing the opinion that it's the same thing by Guf and by Echaluk. And he continues via Shaimrim that only applies to clothing, kesem and clothing. Well, kesem means al besara bilvad, if it's only on her body in places where shechayishanem ein loy shiur, does no shiur. And the Shach, who is says lefin his daiti ein lehokel klau. That's what the Shach says about this. You can't be mekel at all. That you have to be machmer on gufo even less than a gris. The Siddur Tahara brings all the shittas, brings the Shach, asks a question on Shach Siddur Tahara Sif Kotten Yud Beis, and his maskon is on his daiti nire hasoymech lehokel kedas abach lo yefsid. And he even asks on how the Shach understood the Tosfos, he's makshan the shach, and lemaisa the tahara, although he doesn't clearly spell out that it's mutter, that it's up to a gris, even by the body, it's up to a gris. He says, "Hasoymech lahokel lo hifsid." That's his noted to be matter like that. What is the shitta of the Alter Rebbe in this topic? The Alter Rebbe starts in Sifkot and Yudalad. The Alter Rebbe starts by explaining first the Yeshemlim. For a simple reason. The Alter Rebbe writes it on the second half of Sa'if Vav. So Sifkot and Yudalad. The Alter Rebbe starts by explaining the das of the Yeshemlim. That we're choishesh, which is also the way the second day in the B'si Yosef, the second day in the Shulchan Aruch, that we're machmer even less than a gris. Why? He says, if it's only on her body, and it's not on her clothing, then we say that there's no way it could have come from outside. Because if there would have been a bug, it would have hit, or it would have splattered, or whatever it is, it would have hit the clothing first. And then it would have hit the body. The fact that it's only the body, not on the clothing, means obviously that it came from the body.
But it was all just splattered on the clothing, and I think it smashed. So it makes even more sense that it didn't get smashed on her clothing, it went inside, and then her feet smashed it inside.
That could be. Yep. So the way Svara is that if it's in a place where the blood could have only come from there, then we say that because they're not common because they're not the way they understand it is that it's more common on clothing than it is on this. Ma'acholos is more common on clothing and on sadinim more than it is on the body.
It could simply be on the goof in a way that it's not mukach to say that.
Yeah. So he says. Kevon de migufo kochazia ubegufo lechud ishtakach, the Lashon Alter Rebbe, raglayim ledover v'chazoke de migufo kos. He cites the raglayim ledover and says chazoke that came from her body. Mishum hachi nami lo yitonim machoyes pachas mikagris v'oid lesvara zu. According to this svara, we're not mekel in pachas mikagris. This is also, and then you have the first svara, where he starts the Alter Rebbe starts explaining the first svara. And he says that it's no different than he says that when we find only on the body, we're makel that it came from these machoiles. These machoiles. He says, and then he says, come on, Sif Yud Aleph. And like he says, if it's a machoiles, it would come onto her. Maybe it's on her body, it crushed on her body. The only time when we say that how could it have come to the body if it didn't touch her clothing first is if she walked through a supermarket, through a butcher shop. Then you say there's no way the blood could have shot up in a specific way and only hit the place without touching the clothing. But when it comes to machoiles was on the body, and the body crushed it, and that was it. And therefore, we are mekel by machoiles more. You can't say like in other places that if it's only on the clothing and not if it's only in the body, not on the clothing, then it's a problem. Send it to Sif Yud Aleph. The Alter Rebbe over there in Sif Yud Aleph in Sifkot and Chavtes, he explains that if it's only on her body over there in that scenario of Sif Yud Aleph, which is talking about when she walked through the butcher shop, if it's only on her body, only in a place where it could have come from her body, efshar lo lavoi migufa, it could have come from her body, then we say that for sure came from her body, because if it would have come me'alma, it would have been also on her clothing, but that's only in that scenario. Then Alter Rebbe continues over here again. He says, according to the first svara, you can't compare svara, which is making, you can't compare Sif Yud Aleph to here, but according to the second one. According to the second, the Machmer Shitte, this is what he says. He says that, so in parentheses, over here in Sif Kotten Yudalet, Svara Achreina Machoilos Nami Al Chaluki Boy Lishtakuchi. According to the second more Machmer opinion, even if it's a kinner, it should have been first on the clothing. It's more common on the body. But it's more common on the clothing, not on the body. Then Alter Rebbe concludes as follows. The Bach Minchas Yaakov, they're mekel Avol das shach lehachmir kisvara achreina shekach mashma begemara. But the shach is machmir like the svara achreina because that's how it is mashma in the Gemara. The Alter Rebbe does not tell you here, do we follow the shach or do we follow the bach? He starts by saying the first opinion, explaining the shit of the shach. Then he goes to the shit of the bach. Then he goes back to the shit of the shach. Then he tells you the bach is mekel and the shach is machmir. Doesn't tell you which way to paskin. Now, simply reading, if the Alter Rebbe concludes, but Avo, he says, but the shit of the shach is be machmir, l'chayra, it means that you should be machmir, right? That's common sense, usually, because that's how it's Kolel Yapoiskim, that if you conclude that, but there's another shit which is machmir, kach mashma begemara, especially Alter Rebbe says it's mashma from the Gemara like that, l'chayra should be machmir. However, the Piskei Dinim of the Talmud Tzemach Tzedek, he does not take it. He says that the way he writes it with Shulchan Aruch in this Sa'if and Sa'if Vav. The exact lashon is, give me a second, I'll tell you. It's the first big parenthesis in Sa'if Vav. It says Rama v'toysus v'rosh das hashach. V'chein yiski mashach lehachmer. Avol das habachal min chas Yaakov v'chein das crazy places the tahar v'chavas das lehokol kisvara rishayno, which is to be mekel. V'shulchan aruch shel Rabbeinu Zal lo hichriya. He left it without a hachroi. That's how the Piskei Dinim of the Talmud Tzemach Tzedek understood it. Alter Rebbe left it not. There wasn't paskin lekan or lekan. Whether when it comes to gufa, you have to, your machmir even less than the gris, or you still have to follow the shitta, or the amount of the gris. Interestingly, there are two Sfarim which they list the Alter Rebbe straight as the machmirim. One is the Darkei Tshuva, the Munkacher, and Darkei Tshuva in Seif Cotton Membeis. He writes simply, he says, Ein Tiferes Tzvi Seif Cotton Dal, Demikar Chaim, the Ikel Din Lahachim Kisvara Achreinik, which is Vashach. Yeah, that's Tiferes Tzvi writes, V'siyim Shekein Haloche, V'chein Roi Lahoyres Ayin Sham. V'chein Hichriya B'shulchan Aruch HaTanya Seif Cotton Yudalad Ayin Sham. The way the Darkei Tshuva, he takes it, V'chein Hichriya. The Alter Rebbe was Machriya like the Shach. And where did he send it to? Seif Cotton Yudal. You look at Seif Cotton Yudal, it doesn't have dafka that the Alter Rebbe was Machriya, but that's how he understood it. Similarly, in the book Taras Yisrael, which is on Nidda and Mikvois, which we referenced in the past, also he paskins. He takes a little bit of a different approach over there in Seif Cotton Chav Zayin. He writes that his lashon is Nimtza Kesem Afpoches Mikegris Ve'oid Hanal Al Besora Levad, even less than the gris Al Besora Levad Lo Yal Chalukah Tmeya, straight up Tmeya. If you're makel to other people when you have to, you're not nothing lo hifsid. But makel la'acheirim b'letzoyrech. Why? Because ultimately you have a lot of other rishonim and achreinim which paskin like that you could be up to a gris. And he has on the Taras Yisrael on the bottom, he has on each seif where he writes you the sources where he got everything from, and explanations. So the sources is called Yad Elio. That's how he calls his sources. It's under the Taras Yisrael. You'll see it in the bottom of Taras Yisrael. Nevertheless, Seif Cotton Samach, which is referencing this thing, he brings all the shittas. He says that Rambam, Goes Maimonides, V'Shulchan Aruch De'abeis, V'Shulchan Aruch Harav Seif Cotton Yudalad. Chavas Das, V'Shtahare, V'Shach, Tosfos, V'Rosh, V'Lechem V'Simla, V'Shemar V'Kadmoinim, V'Shev Yaakov, V'Shemar V'Breida L'Hachmir. He lists the Alter Rebbe in the whole pile of people that are machmir. Doesn't put him as a suffix. But he says, being that the Bach and are mekel, וכן כוסף חויסן ישוע זה הסטייסוס להוקו וסיד תהרה ומרבודה וחכמסוד להוקו כדי רישיינו, על כן נראה לי דאמקל לאחרים לצוירך לא יפסיד. That's what he says, being that ultimately you have other people, mekel לאחרים לצוירך לא יפסיד. So now let's go and think for a second. Let's look at other places in the Alter Rebbe, see if we could decide what the Alter Rebbe passes. The Alter Rebbe references this idea in another 3 places further down in the Shulchan Aruch. The first place is 2 Sifim further, in Sif Katan Ches. Sif Ches, Sif Katan Yud Ches, an Alter Rebbe. Over there, we're talking about, they were mentioned as a machlokes, or the shitta of the Bach, that you have, that when it's on the body of the woman, you connect all the dots together, you count all of them together, and if they're a gris together, then we're machmir. But if it's less than a gris, you're meko. The only chumras, the only difference between the body and the clothing is by clothing you count each drop independently, but by a kesem, on the body you don't count each drop independently. So Alter Rebbe says, "Shal besara ein toilin lehokel kol kach af lesvara rishon de le'el v'chein pasuk habach." Over here he says, on the gufa you can't be mekel so much, even according to the svara, rishona. He doesn't bring over here bichlal the second shita, because the shach over here right away points out that this whole discussion is irrelevant according to the shita which is machmir. According to the shach, it's irrelevant because. What does it make a difference? Count or not count the dots? We don't care about a gris anyways. We don't need the machlekes and the mechaber. It doesn't apply to asai v'sai. Whether you do count it, whether you do connect all the dots together in the body, or you still connect each one independently, it's no relevant because anyways you're machmer less than a gris. The Alter Rebbe doesn't mention the shit of the shach over here bichlal. So you could say that the Alter Rebbe does not hold like the shach. The Alter Rebbe doesn't even bring him over here. Just mentions the other swara, but. Tzacheni, Alter Rebbe clearly says, l'svara af l'svara rishona. According to the svara rishona, he explains this is according to the svara rishona. So you could say the other way around. No, the Alter Rebbe is trying to tell you, this thing is according to the svara rishona. We don't hold like a svara rishona. We don't have to mention it to you b'chlal. This is irrelevant to us. But if we're explaining why the seif, even according to the svara rishona, it's fine. It's a pirush on the Shulchan Aruch. It's not a halacha.
The shach, when he brings this down, the shach is talking and he says instead of saying af or afilu, it should be dafka. Because taka, according to the Achrena, it's not like that. So you could say it's not. That was not being the taka, the shach walking the taka, and he was writing af.
The Alter Rebbe says the Alter Rebbe quotes the shach and doesn't. The Alter Rebbe says the svara rishona doesn't change it. Yeah. Same thing in the next Sifkot and Sifkot Yutes. Also, the Alter Rebbe says, the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe is in Sifkot and Yutes. Also, he brings, V'hu sheyesh ben kol hadam ha'makif kegris v'oid l'svara harishayna d'l'el sivav. V'pochis megris v'oid l'svara harishayna d'l'el sivav. Again, he discusses it, l'svara harishayna the sivav. He doesn't discuss it, the same thing, doesn't bring the shitta of the shach. But at the same time, he mentions this as, according to the Svara Rishona, is kach v'kach. The same thing you also have further down in Sa'if Katan Samachtes. Also, the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe is, ve'af l'Svara Rishona d'el sivav. It means the places where the Alter Rebbe references it, the place the Alter Rebbe references it later, the 3 places, Yutches, Yutes, and Samachtes, all 3 of them the Alter Rebbe says, the svara harishayna the sivav doesn't mention the svara achrayna, but doesn't write the svara harishayna as is. So this you could. That's what I'm saying. Is it says so you could the simpler way of doing it is the Alter Rebbe is just explaining the Shulchan Aruch over here according to svara harishayna, because we don't have to explain the svara achrayna. All this is irrelevant according to the svara achrayna. But the Etzim Alter Rebbe does pass like the Svara Achrayna. That's how the Darkei Tshuva and the other people understand it. But Piskei Dinim Talmud Tzemach Tzedek doesn't understand like that. He leaves it as a suffix, that the Alter Rebbe was not Machriya. What does that mean as a suffix if it's not Machriya? It's hard to say what the halacha would be in such a scenario. So I guess, because like we explained in the previous shiurim, because in Ksamim, it's a derabanan, and we're meiko, Shaila would be, if you have this together with other sveikas, you could for sure be meiko. If this is the only thing that you have to go on and be meiko, you have to think twice before being meiko.
Does that mean?
That if it's the first day of Shiva Nakim and this person could wait another day to go to mikveh, then you wait. Do another hefsek tahara and go the next day. If it's the 7th day and she's ready in the mikveh and it's less than the gris, you have to use your common sense. One of the important things. How do you get common sense? I don't know.
How do you measure? You have to put it on a deco or something?
No.
How do you measure?
You see, You could put it if you can't figure it out by yourself. If it's a small drop, you see by yourself. If it's a lot, you put it. You put them on top, but it expands when you put it on top.
Right. What you're saying, if it's a woman that's coming to her house, she's not going to show her.
Obviously not.
That's what I'm saying. How do you do it?
She tells you. She looks at it and she tells you the size. Yeah. You ask her what's the size is like. Yeah.
Exactly. I was speaking with exactly why is this different than this? Why are bodies different? Why it doesn't happen? Why it doesn't?
Why?
She just happened to sees it flowing and falls onto the She started. If it's stuck on her body, she's coming. It's a drop. Let's explain how that works.
Because it's a limud of karka olam. Karka olam.
No, on our body. So I want to know what that's
Right. The way to be magid is the kesem on that the din of ksamim that we're saying. The whole tliyah of a kesem is based on a machoilis, right? So if you're going to say it's pashta machoilis, if you're going to say that it's a machoilis,
landed on the beggar to wash she started. It landed on her body, she sees it, right? She sees it flow. It landed on the she started. It landed on her body, she's still not. It really doesn't make sense. Really? No, that's what I said to Faye. She said, if she sees it flowing out, she started. If it landed on the in the beginning, and then the only thing he doesn't mention is that it's a gris. The attacker doesn't mention that
size of this, yeah.
He said if it's double shame or if it's
Begetzavah.
Why, if it's on her body attack, it doesn't matter.
According to first shitta.
Well, yeah, saying what's the difference?
Yeah, if it probably came from a body, then we're machmer.
For sure came from her body, even on the line of Begetzavah, we still say she started.
When it's on something else, by Begetzavah, I'll tell you this is because you can't tell.
No, she saw it coming out, or if the end of a double shame
The Gemara says karka olam.
I'm just saying that what's pshat?
It's the limud of
landed
it.
on her body, the same blood. One drop landed on her body, she's permanent. The other drop landed on the.
I have to look into it. I'll get back to you on that. We'll explain to you in a second one. Let's go to the. Now the Tzemach Tzedek himself, in his Piskei Dinim, not the Talmud of Tzemach Tzedek himself, in his Piskei Dinim, on Taz Seif Kotten Chav Daled, which is in page 56 in our booklet, the end of it, is talking about a scenario where a woman made a bdika. She put it, tachsa bi'erecha, she put it in her body, and then the next day she looked at it and she found blood. And over there he says, Ataka, according to the shittas of the Machmirim, he says, the Taz is going according to the Machmirim, the Rambam and the Rosh, the Kol Shanimtza al B'sari, Lo Yamrinon Talina B'machilas Achula. If it's found in the body, we can't be toilet on a machilas, and therefore we are machmer. And then he asks questions on it, and the Maskane, we're not going to say it clearly, the Maskane, he says that he comes to Maskana, he says that even these people that are machmir begufa it has nothing to do with whether the machoilis is found or not. He says, "Gach film mogen shein dam moker talinon b'macheres." Ach ef shalema de ha de svira lei de loy talinon bedam macheres beguf. Why is it that we are why is it that when it comes to dam macheres on the guf we're not mekel? It's not ubichlal she'amru absara safek Torah safek tamei. It's because the Gemara in Daf Nun Ches, when it discusses the 4 questions about Rabbi Yirmiyah, over there the Gemara says that on her body safek Torah safek tamei, veloy mishum de'ein derech b'macheles, has nothing to, not because it's more common, less common for the kinim to be there. That's not the reason. It's because the Gemara says that if it's on the body, safek Torah safek tamei, mi'ela mishum the korev yoyser shehu me'amoker, because it's closer and there's more of a chance that it came from the moker. That's why when it's on the body we are more machmir, even less than a gris. Aval b'mokim she'ein, so the Tzemach Tzedek over here adds, but this that she found it of a mokim she'ein dam moker yochel lipul shom hein netonin shaper chulu v'duk. But if it's in a place where it can't fall over there, then obviously we are mekel. Even these people are not going to say that when you find it on the body in a place where it couldn't have come, that you have to say that even less than a gris. But the reason is not like we said until now that it has to do with the macheles. Huh?
Why gris would make it tummy?
What?
Why would a gris make a tummy that? If it can't be from there, why would it make a tummy?
Yeah, there's the shit of the Rashba that even in certain H.N. Bodok, even more than the gris is mutter.
Right.
See, the Arsha, this is...
That's what he said seems to apply. If it's a gris, she's tummy. The shit is actually makes sense.
Yeah, but so that's why you can't make 2 chumras one on top of another. That's the Machzedek writes in the Tshuva. You can't add all the chumras together. If you have one, you can be machmer. So the Tzemach Tzedek over here just brings, he explains the Taz, he brings the shit of the Taz, he doesn't bring the other shit, but he explains the svara of the machmirim, that it's not like it's not just because we say it's a machlekes b'mtzias pashut, are kinim common on the body more than on the, also like it on the clothing, or they're not common, but it's rather a question of whether you have it's korev that it comes from the body, or it's not korev that it comes from the body. Right? So you could understand from the Tzemach Tzedek over here that Tzemach Tzedek is also noite lahachmir in this scenario, that if it's on the body in a place where it could have come from the mocker, then we are machmir even more than a gris. Obviously, you could always explain the Tzemach Tzedek the same way. The Tzemach Tzedek is just explaining the shit of the Taz, but it's not passing like that lamaisa, but still doesn't bring any other opinion, doesn't mention anybody else, just explains it and leaves it like that. Now, let's go back to the Piskadinim of the Talmud of the Tzemach Tzedek, where we have the next point that I wanted to discuss, which is also in the same Sa'if Ches. Where is it? Let me find it in a second. Where it is. Oh, sorry, in Sivov. In Sivov, in the Piskadim of Talmud Tzemach Tzedek, V'im nimtza al bigdeha ve'al besara, we found both on her body and on her clothing. L'divrei hakoil ene chashesh lo yipoches mikegris. This is the Hamshach where he says that the Alter Rebbe is not machriya about the body. He says if it's found both on the body and on the clothing, The divrei koil has to be a gris to make her aser. Why? Vatam nira damrinon. Because then we say, "Amacholos nismach al bigdeho shemotzu sham." The macholos is according to it's found for sure on the clothing, and that's where it got crushed, and it crushed onto the clothing to the body. Umisham nislach lach besara. Vein ze machzik mokum mokum shim ze gam al bigdeho. And that's why we are makel over here. Over here in this scenario, when it's on the body and on the clothing together.
Can't say that happened the other order. The first was on
That's what he says. No, we're not. That's a hamshach. We're not machzik mimokim l'mokim. We say that this is, and we're makel up to a gris. Now, what does it apply over here? This is talking about when she found it on her body and on her clothing, and we say that a macholis got smashed between the body and the clothing, or it got smashed on the clothing, and from there it went to the body. Now, there's a very small from the actual Tzemach Tzedek back to where we were before in the Pisk Dinim in the beginning of Siman Kuf Tzadik. First paragraph on Kuf Tzadik in the actual Pisk Dinim of that Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek is discussing a scenario where a woman is wearing more than one piece of clothing, and she finds blood on her body and on the piece of clothing that's closest to her, but not on any other piece of clothing. So it's on the body and it's on the clothing, but it's nowhere else. So it couldn't have splashed from outside, but the sweat is, maybe a kino got smashed between the two. You don't know. Tzemach Tzedek says, "V'tzorich iyun l'maise im nimtza beguf v'cholok hapnimi bilvad." Laduk. Leaves it as a tzorich iyun. If it's only found on the body together with a piece of clothing that's right away close to it, tzorich iyun if you could be makel, like the din of Ksam. Tzemach Tzedek is not machriya. So again, the fact is that if you want to go based on the kav that every din of Ksamim is the Rabbanan in your makel, the big question is, why did the Tzemach Tzedek have to say b'chol tzorich iyun? B'chlal, why does the machlekes hapoiskim? Comes to these things, every time there's a suffix, just say suffix l'kula. Tzemach Tzedek could have just said, we don't know, suffix l'kula. Same thing before. When there's no achra from the Alter Rebbe, suffix l'kula. Every place you go, suffix l'kula. Obviously, the fact that it's not written straight up at tzorich iyun and therefore suffix l'kula means that when it becomes tzorich iyun, sometimes you have to be machmer. You can't just right away take every scenario and say that since it's a tzorich iyun, since it's a suffix, we go l'kula. Now we're going to go to another topic. In Sif Ches, the Mechaber writes as follows. If you have a kesem, im ein bekesem b'mokim echad kegris v'oid, if the kesem in one location doesn't have more than a gris, even though you have tipin, arbi smuchin zelazeh, you have a bunch of them all around, and they're not, achi im netzarfim ish b'mesim kegris, if you're going to connect all the dots together, it's going to become more than a gris, te'oid te'hoira, still tar, shon toilin koil tipa v'tipa bekina. Yeah, it has to be all of them have to be connected. 1 second. Has to be all connected. And if they're not connected, then we don't count them. Now, interestingly, over here, there's a few nekudas we want to talk about on this seif. There is over here the Alter Rebbe on this seif. Actually, not on. I mix up with something else. Now, let's go to Tzemach Tzedek. There's a small tshuva that Tzemach Tzedek writes. It's about 4 lines long. Tshuva Kuf Mem Daled. It's interesting. Tshuva Kuf Mem Daled, where the Tzemach Tzedek discusses a scenario where you have a bunch of drops that are separate, but there is a line of blood connecting 2 of them together. Okay, you see a line dragged from one to another. Do we connect those 2 together to make it into a gris or not? And the Tzemach Tzedek over there says you can't compare it to a kesem arich. The Gemara over there talks when you have a long kesem, or when you have a shir. It's like a circle. Just the outside is red and the inside is white. That you count everything together. Because over there, sai when it's a line of blood, and sai when it's a circle and it's empty on the inside, we say that we see clearly that it's all one kesem. But over here, we see clearly that each one is its own independent kesem. It dropped, stopped, this is dragged, but it's not the same kesem. There's another kesem, so we don't connect them. That's what Tzemach Tzedek over here explains. And he says, be'etzim, he could have said that, this is a very interesting yisoid, because we're going to get to it in a minute from the Alter Rebbe. He says, the Gemara over there in Daf Nun Ches, where Rabbi Yirmiyah asks the question, Bashir, if she finds blood, kashir, that's like a circle with empty inside, mahu, kashura, if it's like a line, mahu. And the Gemara says, al besara, safek tamei, safek tahir, tamei. Right? And over there, you would think from the Gemara, from the simple reading of the Gemara, that this only applies in Begufo, because the Gemara is asking it on Begufo. So Tzedek points out something very interesting. If you look in the Alter Rebbe in Sa'if Tes, Sa'if Kotten Yutes in the Alter Rebbe, when the Alter Rebbe discusses this scenario of Ogel, the circle, which we're going to get to soon when we're discussing something else. When it's Ogel, the Alter Rebbe says, Ogel ketabas, shichalul b'emtzaisa. What's this shir? It's a circle, which is empty on the inside. You only see red on the outside. And we say, sheyesh ben kol adam makif kegris ve'oid, b'pochis migris, oy lechulei alma kashenimtza kozeh bechaluka, tehoira, talinu b'machoilas. The kulei alma, when you find such a thing on her chaluk, on her body, on her clothing, she's tahir. But what is Alter Rebbe talking about? When it's a circle and it's pachas mikagris. That means the Alter Rebbe takes this shir and this shura that the Gemara talks about on the body, and the Tzemach Tzedek understands from the Alter Rebbe over here that this shir also applies to a chaluk. Even though the Gemara is talking about megufa, it also applies to chaluk. Tzemach Tzedek says, if so, comes the question, when you have these dots and they're connected with a line, how can you be mekel? If you want to bring a eye from the Gemara, if the Gemara doesn't work, because the Alter Rebbe understands the Gemara to also apply machmer, also by chaluk, also by clothing. So therefore, when you have the dots and they're connected with a line together, it shouldn't be considered like 2 separate ones. It should be considered like one long one. So he says, V'shema, Tzemach concludes, and this over here in Kufim Dad, V'shema, betipin yesh lahakal yaser, when it's drop, even though they have the line connecting them, you could be mekel more. Mikashir, when it's like a circle, like a ring, empty in the middle. The sham mikol mokem guf echad hu. Because by a shir, it's very important words to the Tzemach Tzedek understands the Alter Rebbe, that by a case of a shir, it's guf echad hu. It is one body. It is one kesem. It's one circle, one line. Over here, it's 2 separate ones that happen to have a thin line that went from one to another. But it's not, you don't see it as one piece. It's not one circle. It's not one line. It's 2 independent lines that happen to have a circle, happen to have a line connecting them.
Why can't we use the same svar in reverse? So if you have a kesem on a seam that's bigger than a gris, right? We open the seam underneath it's white, so we can count that as a separate summon. Why don't we say, if you look at it, it's one big kesem, even though they're separated, since it looks like...
No, it fell as one.
So I'm telling you why we can take this svara and flip it in reverse to be more machmir also. In a case which is very common, where you have a kesem on the seam of underwear or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Where when you look at it plain,
Yeah.
it's one big kesem, but if you flip up the seam, you realize it's white underneath. Now the two sides.
Well, if you have, sometimes you can stretch it and you find white between each thing. You're still not makel.
No, so on the seam you wouldn't be makel because it's two separate pieces of cloth. So each side is less than a gris.
Right,
But
unless.
if you leave it the way it is, it looks like one big kesem, and according to this swallow that's outside of it, is the way how that it looks like one big Mario. It doesn't.
Maybe.
Then you should be machmir.
Maybe. But it's not, the Tzemach Tzedek did not bring this lahachmir, only the hakel.
Now, what I was talking about is that there's a white substance.
Yeah. It becomes one case. We're going to talk about it in a second. That's specifically about that. Now, so this, since we already mentioned this, I want to go into this, into this topic, this next topic that's relevant to the Sif test. So in Sif test, you have the Shulchan Aruch says, "Kesem animtzal b'sara shu orech k'ritzui agril." When it's long, this is a Gemara. It's long al b'sara. It's long, or it's agril, or it's a circle, or shayu tipin, or it's drops. And he says, she's tmeya ve'ein omer ilu nudaf min haguf lehoya kazeh. We say she's tummy, and we don't say that if it would have come from the body, it wouldn't have come in such a matter, and therefore she's tahir. The Alter Rebbe right away comes and he explains to you over here a few interesting yisodos in Sa'if Katan Yutes. Like we just mentioned before. You have, first of all, what are we talking about? What's this ogel? We said it's a circle that it's not red in the inside. Then the Alter Rebbe goes, the second, vafilu nimtza min dam lovin, or yorik. You find the mara, which is white or green in the middle. And around it you have a perimeter which is red. Or shacher, or black. Or sha'ar tmuna niflo, be'inyon shenire sha'koil hu kesem echad. It looks like came as one kesem. V'ha'adoim hu kates v'soiv shel ha'lavan, and the red is the edge, the conclusion, the end of the white. Ubein ha'koil yesh yoser mikagris. You combine the white with the red, it all becomes the size of a gris. But if you have just the red, doesn't have a gris, she is tahir. Why? Because we say that when she had this mare, the lecha leveinoke, the white mare came from her body. There was a ma'acholis right there. The blood of the ma'acholis spread, the blood of the ma'acholis pushed, mitzateva hadam, it spread out to the edges. And therefore, you only count the blood. You don't say that everything came out as one. And then Alter Rebbe continues, even if you know for a fact that the white or the green came from the makar, and did not come, we don't say that it came from the tzdadim, from some other place in the body. We know for sure that the white or the green came from the makar. We still say, talinan ha'odem ha'ashachesh v'katzvesa v'dam ha'achelis. We still take what's along the edge, and we say that it came from a ma'achelis, as long as it does not have the size of a gris. Why? Shekein darkom shel ma'achelis, these makom zuam of a lichluch. The ma'achelis hang out in places of sweat, and therefore they're going to be hanging out in that area, and there's going to be ma'achelis mixing in with whatever there is over there. But if it's more than a gris, then we don't say that. If it's more than a gris, we say, even if she has a tliyah of some other sort, we still, without straight up knowledge, we're not going to be matir to do more than a gris. Why is that? Because once we say, since we know for a fact that it came migufa, that it came from her body, and we know that niftach mekoira, to release the white or the green, the blood probably came out with it, and being that it looks like one kesem, therefore we are machmir. because we say that one and the other together are all one, and being that there is blood all around this white, and the blood around it is more than a gris, we can't be toilen them acheles. We go back to say that it came, we know that it came from the body, and therefore we are machmer. And the only time we're mekel is when you have a dam macheles. Yeah, and then the Alter Rebbe continues that this comes from the Ramah, the Taz is chaylik on him, that he says as long as you could be toilet and makkah, it could be toilet, the red and the makkah, or anything else. We're talking about more than the gris, and we're still toilet. The Shach was masking with the Taz, and even the Ramah, when he's machmir, when you see a white that has red around it, and the red is more than the gris, is only beyodua bevadai shehamare hatoiru migufa. Only when you know for a fact, without a doubt, that the cut that came from her body. But if you don't know for a fact, afal pi she'ein lo b'mali sloisai umistomehu migufa ein loi elodin kesem tohir. It's still considered a kesem which is tohir. Which means that if you see a mare which has a kesem, which has two colors, three colors, you have red, you have brown. It's more common than having white in the middle. You have brown, you have red around it. And the red around it, all around it is red as one piece, and it's more than the gris, the red around it, then you are machmer. If you know that it came migufa. When it's on the underwear, you know that it came megufa. Very hard to say that it did not come megufa. Right? But what happens now if you have brown and a kesem? I'm not talking about pajamas, I'll get to pajamas soon. If you have brown, a kesem which is brown and has red on the two sides. The reds aren't touching each other. You flip over the kesem and you see on the back you have the same thing. You have brown in the middle, you have red on two sides. It's always important to flip these to the back because you're going to be able to see red. Sometimes the brown sits on top of the red. You flip it over, you see the whole thing is red. But let's say the front is brown and two reds on the sides, and the back is brown and two reds on the sides. Do you say that it's a kesem, that it's all connected, or not? Now, Alter Rebbe does not discuss a scenario when you have the red split in a case of a kesem, when the red is split in one kesem, and the red is split on the two sides of it. And so white clothing, and you have brown, red, and red. Alter Rebbe doesn't discuss this scenario. But if you're going to look at it based on the way what we mentioned before, we pointed out from Tzemach Tzedek says that the reason why the Alter Rebbe is machmer is because it looks, it's a guf echad hu. And when do we say that we don't connect the drops together, the tipping together? We could say that each one came from its own kina. Right? It's two completely separated. When it's all connected, we look at it as a guf echad. When you have such a matter, l'cha'ira, it would make sense to say that you could separate them. Each one is counted independently because they are not connected. Even though from far it looks, be'etzem, it's not one mare. One mare is talking about, Alter Rebbe discusses, when you have any tzura nifla that you could see that it came as one thing. When you see that it came, when you see different colors, it's not, a lot of times it's different consistencies, it's not one thing. It didn't come out as once. It's two separate things. So you look at each one independently, the red on one side, red on the other side, and the brown in the middle, but you have to make sure that it's not connected, then it's on the bottom, there was red that got pushed to the sides. And now we'll finish with one more thing.
You wouldn't say that for two reds that are just extremely different consistencies?
No. It's red is red. Just dry differently.
So it's not that consistent, it's just about the color?
Yeah. Now, just interestingly to point out that the Tzemach Tzedek, I don't have that much time, I might have to go a few minutes into the break. The Tzemach Tzedek in Kuf Amidei Kuf Amidvav, talking about a woman which, actually I'm not going to discuss this now because I don't have time. I just want to say one more thing, which is Negeh L'Maaseh. When you have a striped clothing, you have in Sif Yud, the Mechaber writes that something which is Kesem Shenimtzal Beget Tzavua Tahoiro. If it's found in the Beget Tzavua, she's Tahir. The Alter Rebbe in Sif Kot Nechav Gimel over there writes, why is on Beget Tzavua is Tahir? She'ein HaKesem Nikor Boy Kemaret Dam Gomor. You cannot, on the Davar Tzavua, you cannot tell the color that it's a Dam Gomor. That's the reason why in the Davar Tzavua we cannot be Machmer and say that it's blood. And it doesn't make a difference whether the clothing is red or the clothing is another color. As long as the clothing is not white, you can't tell that it's blood, then it is, then you could say, then you can't be Oyser and say it's a Beget Tzavua. And then the Alter Rebbe is a Beged Menumor, a striped clothing, Begvonim Rabim, with many colors, Levonim Umin, white and colorful. It's found partially on the colored and partially on the white. If just on the white you don't have kegris ve'oid, the tzo'ein hatzavua mitztarefima, you don't connect what's on the color to make it aser. Afal pi shenir'e le'ein shehakoil kesem, even though it's clearly visible that it is one kesem. Me'achar sheloi gozru al tzavua. There was no gzeir chacham, we're not goizer on a kesem which is visible on a davar tzavua. And the Alter Rebbe brings it from the Shas HaTshuvos, Me'il Tzedakah. And this is where the Alter Rebbe ends his quote, that if you have it on color and on white, we don't look at the colorful. We only look at the white. There is a Piskei Din of the Talmud of the Tzemach Tzedek. He quotes this Alter Rebbe. This is the same Sif Yud. He quotes the Alter Rebbe. But he pretty much quotes the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe. It's towards the end of it. The end of Sif Kot and Yud, of Sif Yud in the Piskei Dinim. And he adds, and he continues. After he quotes the Milat Tzedakah, and he continues the Alter Rebbe, he adds, if you have one kesem that starts on white, ends on white, and continues through a color, and both whites together have a gris, he says they connect. And over here in such a scenario, we don't say that tzavua separates the two from each other. And he adds, he says, Alter Rebbe didn't quote the rest of the Me'il Tzedakah. Seems like the Alter Rebbe doesn't hold of this part of the Me'il Tzedakah. That's why he didn't quote it. Because he says the way the Alter Rebbe understood it is the moment that tzavua is not mitztaref, it also becomes a hefsek, and each one independently becomes its own. And he does not, but the Piskei Tzemach Tzedek himself passes not the Alter Rebbe. But he says the Alter Rebbe clearly disagreed with the Me'il Tzedakah in the second half. When you have white and color in the middle, it is fine, according to the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe, the Piskei Dinim is not the only person who understood the Alter Rebbe this way, that the Alter Rebbe Bichlal doesn't hold of the second half of Siddur Tahara, and the Alter Rebbe B'dafka didn't quote him. There is an Emek Shaila from the Haran Steipler, the same one that wrote the Chibur L'Tahara, which we all know from Hilchos Mikvos, whoever was here last year. And he ends over there as follows. This is going to end the shir. B'Shulchan Aruch sheskeni hagoyin ziyah hetik din ha'me'il tzedakah the bekesem belovon uvetzavua ein mitztaref. Yeah, the first part of the Me'il Tzedakah. V'lo hetik adin ha'mefayrash b'yisut shuvo the mashal beis levon mitztaref. V'al kein nire de choylek olav. It's clear that Alter Rebbe says that Alter Rebbe is choylek on the Me'il Tzedakah. He says, but tzarich because he's having a whole discussion over there. That's how he pretty much concludes his tshuvas. This tshuva, that basically being that there is it's clear from the Alter Rebbe that the Alter Rebbe does not hold the second half of the Me'il Tzedakah. He understood the Alter Rebbe like that. He's make like the Alter Rebbe, the Piskei Dinim of the Tzemach Tzedek, of the Talmud Tzemach Tzedek, also understood the Alter Rebbe this way, even though he's not paskin like him, but Bepoil, it's clear from the Alter Rebbe that the Alter Rebbe does not hold of the second opinion, of the second half of the middle tzedakah, and if it's something which is white and color in the middle, each white is counted independently, even if you see it going through and through. Huh? That's how I was taught to paskin. Yeah, fine. See you in, I don't know.